I would like to thank Tanya because this is very much her brainchild. And so this is not going to be a very long presentation. I hope it's not going to be too long. And it's called A Dog's Life. So the National Institute of Statistics and Geography estimates that about 70% of the 18 million dogs in Mexico live on the street, either strays or simply abandoned. It's a very sobering statistic, but let's be positive and look at the numerous ways in which dogs have helped and continue to help humanity. They hunt, they retrieve, they move heavy loads, they guard houses and babies, they herd everything from turkeys to sheep. Dogs may be the heirs of the deaf, rescue someone drowning. Some dogs' incredible sense of smell allows them to detect cancers and locate those buried alive when buildings collapse. Sometimes their coats may be used as wool. And some dogs race for our pleasure, and for others, having a particular kind of dog is a status symbol. When the Twin Towers were burning, Russell the Labrador led her blind owner and 30 city workers down 80 floors through fire and thick smoke out onto the pandemonium of the streets. This evening, I'm going to be showing you just a sampling of the thousands of images of dogs in art, all of which are with the intention of tugging at your heartstrings and also tugging at your purse strings, hopefully, to help build a much-needed dog rescue and shelter facility on the outskirts of Tepoztlan. So this first image, I'll talk about a little bit later, but I didn't want you to be looking at a blank screen as I gave the statistics. So let's begin. So it's a dog's life. Without the dog, no herds. Without herds, no sustenance, no clothing, no time to waste. Consequently, no astronomical observations, no science, no industry. That was the observation of Oscar Honoré in 1863. And then we have what Ambrose Bierce said in 1906. Dog, a kind of additional or subsidiary deity designed to catch the overflow and surplus of the world's worship. And thirdly, Arthur Schopenhauer. I would have no pleasure living in a world where dogs did not exist. But let's go back 7,000 years. This is one of the oldest and the first images that was found in the Saudi Arabia peninsula. And it shows hunters, and some of the dogs are on leashes. Now, what is extraordinary about this is that the hunters had the dogs on leashes even before people moved into farming communities. So this is considered to be the oldest representation of hunters and dogs with leashes. So I think that that's quite an extraordinary way to begin. And this is the Livre de la Chasse, the Book of the Hunt from the early 15th century, written by Gaston Plébus, who was a count, and he apparently had 15 or 1,600 hounds, and he obviously loved to hunt. So this was in southern France, and he wrote glowingly about them as being the noblest, wisest, and most sensible beast in God's creation, and in general terms, I make no exception for men or any other living being. Gaston's book describes the cutting edge of 14th century veterinary care. And if you look, you can see that they're all caring for their dogs. And this is something else that he says, advising that if one's dogs have hurt their feet running in evil country among thorns and briars, One should wash their feet with sheep's tallow boiled in wine. And so that they may not break their claws running on hard ground, one should cut off a little off the end of the claws with pincers before the hounds go hunting. And next we have these two dogs, which are known as the Townley Greyhounds, and this was after the owner of the piece. These exquisite dogs were unearthed in the southeast of Rome in 1774, but it was later suggested that in fact they were Suzuki hounds. The subtle carving renders their physical presence perfectly, but what we notice is how the sculptor has captured the tenderness of their emotions, how the dog nibbles at the dog's ear as he turns towards her. The details and expressions on the dog's faces suggest that the sculptor, that they may have been the sculptor's own hounds, or at least he knew them very well. So this is from the 2nd century contemporary era. And from 1427, these Saluki hounds were painted by Xuanzong, the 5th Ming emperor. And I love the inscription, which of course I didn't read, I had to get the translation. The inscription on the painting reads, "Playfully painted by the imperial bush in 1427. So along with greyhounds, Salukis are the world's fastest and most admired sight hounds. That is, dogs who hunt by sight and speed rather than by scent and endurance. It's believed that they originated thousands of years ago, either in Egypt or in the deserts of Saudi Arabia. Abu Nuwa, the Arab poet, wrote of a Saluki hound, "Like a hawk swooping on sand grouse, he peels the skin of the earth with 4 feet. He runs so swiftly." And with a contrast to the Townley Greyhounds and the Saluki hounds, here we have the rat catchers. So hunting deer and wild boar had been the sport of kings. Hunting rats was definitely less prestigious and employed a completely different kind of dog, the terrier. For example, sweet little Yorkshire Terriers were specifically bred to hunt rats in the cotton mills in northern England. One observation was, rat catchers never went in fear of unemployment. And Sir Edwin Landseer, who was considered the preeminent English painter and sculptor in the 19th century, was well known for his paintings of animals, particularly horses, dogs, and stags. But his best known works are the lion sculptures at the base of Nelson's Column in Trafalgar Square in London. In this painting, he's used his own dogs as models and has captured the action at dog's eye level, putting the viewer right in the picture, so we really are there with the dogs. Brutus, who is Landseer's rough white-haired terrier dog, has already slain 2 rats. There. And I don't know whether you can see it, but there's the head of another rat that's peeking up through the floorboards there. And I love the expressions on the faces of the other 2. But he's clearly in control. Now, when I was growing up, the book that I learned to read on was, and I think Paul, this may have applied to Paul as well, I learned to read from the Ladybird books. And the Ladybird books were very simple. And a few years ago, some enterprising authors had the very bright idea that they should do Ladybird books for grown-ups. So this one is the series How It Works, and it's the dog. And the authors of this one were also the authors of Cooking Your Cat. But this seemed quite fitting. Dog and man have been friends for many thousands of years. Dognald is going to bury his owner's dinner in the garden in case any hyenas or jackals or saber-toothed tigers come and try to steal it. So I'll leave this out for afterwards if people want to look at it. So we've looked at hunting dogs, and let's move on to working dogs. Around the world, cultures and languages change, but one thing remains the same. It seems that people everywhere, or many people, love their dogs. Photographer Andrew Fleddabo discovered the unique bonds between people and their dogs, as well as the animal's strong sense of a strong desire to work. And this was while he was traveling the globe, photographing working dogs in their element. For his series, The Shepherd's Realm, he traveled to Norway, the highlands of Scotland, southern France, and New Zealand. And the photographer said, seeing them in action, seeing these dogs in action, made me realize just how devoted they are to us. They love to work, and the bond between human and dog is uncanny. Dogs as pets definitely have an important role to play, but to me, the dog is at its best and happiest when it has a job to do. And we have friends in the Lake District in England, one of whom is a photographer, and every year they go to the sheepdog trials, and so he sends copious photographs of various dogs herding sheep. It had been suggested that the earliest surviving illustrations of a guide dog in Western Europe, in the sense of a dog providing mobility support to a person with impaired vision, dated from the late 15th century. But as you can see, there are actually several earlier descriptions of guide dogs that survive in medieval manuscripts, such as this one. One of these is in the Decretals of Pope Gregory IX. I did not know what a decretal was, but it means a papal decree. And this was produced in the south of France around the end of the 13th century. So here we have a blind beggar being led by his dog. And an unfortunate kind of work dog. Laika. It was tough being one of the thousands of stray dogs on the streets of Moscow. Life was short and violent, with little food or shelter. It was these tough, streetwise, and friendly dogs that scientists from the Moscow Aviation Institute had in mind for their top secret space research program. Laika was the first space hero. She'd been taken from the Moscow streets and was trained to become accustomed to living on her spacecraft. She was sealed in her rocket on November the 3rd, 1957. News of the record-breaking space dog made front-page headlines around the world, but I won't describe how she died. She was the first of the space dogs to be commemorated in books, on stamps, and postcards. There were Laika, not Latka, although a Latka would be nice. There were Laika branded cigarettes and matches, and her image was printed on ornaments, paperweights, clocks, and watches. To tie in with Soviet anniversary celebrations, and I love this, Laika was often portrayed looking noble next to Lenin, which I thought was wonderful. The dog was presented as though she'd known she was dying for an important cause, helping her masters to conquer outer space. So from work dogs, let's move on to dogs in religion. The ancient Egyptians believed that men and animals were created together by the sun god Ra, and therefore animals were partners in life and worthy of respect. As such, they trusted the dog with both their lives and their souls. On Earth, they relied on Sirius, the dog star, that signaled when it was at a particular point on the horizon, that signaled the coming of the annual Nile flood to irrigate all Lower Egypt's crops. In the realms of the dead, they entrusted themselves to the canine-headed deity Anubis. Here you see Anubis. In this detail from the Book of the Dead, Anubis can be seen leading Hunefer, who was a royal scribe, towards the scales of judgment. And here's Anubis again. So the scales of judgment were to adjust the all-important plumb weight on the right, and on the left would have been Hunefer's heart. And that was to see if Hunefer had led an ethical and moral life and was eligible for the afterlife. So the fact that this has been recorded in the Book of the Dead of Hunefer, this detail, it tells us that in fact he had lived a moral life, and so he is now enjoying himself in the afterlife. And this may be familiar to you. Xolotl, the Aztec god, was a god of fire and lightning. He was commonly depicted as a dog. And here he is. Oops. Oh, shoot. Oh, shoot. Oh, panic. No, I always get very apprehensive because it seems every single time I give a talk, there is some disaster, some technical disaster. And so the heart starts pounding. But at least there isn't an earthquake yet. So, okay, I'm sorry. The little pointer at the top. So this is where Xolotl is. And he was the dog-headed deity. And he was the brother and the twin of Quetzalcoatl, who, of course, whose birthplace was Amatlan. So the name comes from the god Xolotl, who, according to ancient narratives, is its creator. Sorry, I should have said we're talking about Xolo, the hairless breeds of dogs. And I will try to pronounce it, and if I have mispronounced it, please tell me afterwards rather than correcting me in front of people. So the hairless breed of dogs, the Xoloitzcuintli, have appeared in the art of Mesoamerican cultures of Western Mexico for over 3,000 years. And as in ancient Egypt, one of the principal reasons for this was the faith these peoples had in the dog's ability to guide them through the terrible dangers of the world of the dead. And dogs have played an important role in Dia de los Muertos long before the modern celebrations that we know today. According to Aztec tradition, dogs were humankind's best friend, not only in this life, but also in the afterlife. The Aztecs, as well as the Maya and the Toltecs, considered Xolos sacred. They believed the dogs guided the souls of the dead through the underworld. And archaeologists have dug up ceramic dog statues as well as skeletons, suggesting that ancient people were often buried with their Xolos so that they could stay together in the afterlife. Xolos remain a powerful cultural icon in Mexico. And perhaps the great Mexican artist Rufino Tamayo's inspiration for animals was a 5th or 6th century ceramic howling canine that he'd seen in the Anthropology Museum in Mexico City. Now, the light behind the dogs, this yellow, is somewhat eerie, but to me, the dogs don't seem frightening. They seem more curious, more interested than afraid, less snarling than excited. It's been suggested that the blue bones at the dog's paws read as an allusion to the living bone that had been torn from the underworld at great cost by Xolotl and used by his twin, Quetzalcoatl, to create humanity, and by Xolotl himself to create the Xolo, the hairless dogs. And this is Diogenes. The Greek philosopher Diogenes, after that little detour, was also known as the dog, and he was born in around 410 BCE. Diogenes became a student of Antisthenes, who was the aesthetically minded follower of Socrates. Diogenes became homeless by choice, and he took up residence in a large earthenware storage jar on an Athens street. For the following few years, he lived, ate, and even masturbated publicly in his street dwelling. Here he is seated at the abode, lighting the lamp. Okay, so here's Diogenes with his lamp and surrounded by his faithful dogs. I love how they look very dignified and totally at ease with the fact that this is a man who does all kinds of things in public, but it's clear that they don't really, they're his faithful companions. Anyway, he was lighting the lamp in daylight with which he was to search for an honest man. And it was this behavior, this strange behavior, that gained Diogenes the nickname the dog, or kynikos. But although these terms were meant to be an insult, Diogenes took the name to heart. And once, when asked why he was called the dog, he calmly replied, "I fawn on the people who give me something, bark at those who don't, and sink my teeth into scoundrels." His companions were dogs, as we see here, that also served as emblems of his cynic, that is Greek kynikos, dog-like philosophy, which emphasized an austere existence. And here we have St. Dominic, a stained glass window in the St. Cecilia Mother House in Nashville, Tennessee. And at the bottom, it's a little hard to see, unfortunately, there is a dog, a gray dog, with a torch in its mouth. So when St. Dominic's mother, the Blessed Jane of Azza, was pregnant, she had a dream of a dog with a torch in its mouth running around the world and setting everything on fire. So she went to the monastery of Santo Domingo de Silos and asked a monk what it meant. He replied that the child in her womb would be a great preacher who would set the world ablaze with the fire of his words. And the word Dominican is a play on the Latin, Domini Canes, which means dogs of the Lord. On our final image, which may be a little surprising in something entitled A Dog's Life, when you first look at it, is the interior of the Oude Kerk in Delft. So having been stripped of their images and whitewashed by Protestant reformers in the 16th century, the Dutch Republic's large Gothic churches offered a compelling subject for artists. Emmanuel de Vita was one of a small group of painters who specialized in explorations of the light, shade, and volume particular to church interiors. And this is a very beautiful church. But here, look at these young boys. The young boys are scribbling on this column, and then over here, we have a dog urinating. So what I find so fascinating is what on earth provoked or what inspired Emmanuel de Vita to paint this beautiful interior and then to show us little boys doing graffiti and a dog having a pee. So a new subject, dogs as pets. This small Tlatilco woman is a figurine of model terracotta with traces of polychromy. It's one of the earliest examples of representational art found to date in the Valley of Mexico. It's been described as a masterpiece, and I think we can see why, because of its originality, vitality and spontaneity. A true image of tenderness, a snapshot of the moment that the puppy leaps into her arms, into the woman's arms. This is known as the Alexandra dog, and it's been dated to the 2nd century BCE, and it was unearthed in El Shatbi in what was known as Lower Egypt. The naturalistic rendition of this dog could rival any of those painted by the old masters. Here's a living, breathing animal who knows he's guilty of knocking over the vase, and he could just as easily be living today as 2,000 years ago. I mean, look at the expression on his eyes. I think it's absolutely beautiful. It's just wonderful, this. And this 1st century BCE, Kawe Kanem, this Pompeii dog mosaic, was found in a structure known as the House of the Tragic Poet, which really I wanted to go down a rabbit hole with that one to find out why it was the house, why he had been called a tragic poet. But then I thought I needed to concentrate on the dogs. So the house is thought to have been built towards the end of the 1st century BCE. And Kawe Kanem, meaning beware of the dog, warns visitors that there were dogs present in the house. But really, if we walked around any of the streets in Valle de Atongo and saw one of these outside, we would know exactly what it represented. In fact, that might be something for some enterprising tile maker to do. The Arnolfini portrait, painted in 1434, may be familiar to some of you. It's a very famous portrait. But what we're interested in here is the presence of this dog. So the presence of the dog in the foreground is a clear indication, and it's a clear allusion for marital fidelity. This is thought to be one of the first appearances of a realistic pet dog in Western painting. And Van Eyck was one of the first artists to use oils. And in this painting, he's not only chosen to show the beauty and the complexity of the luscious textiles, but also this Griffon Terrier, he's captured the texture and the multiple colors of the Griffon Terrier's coat. He was also the first to paint such a realistic domestic scene. So this was painted within 7 years as the Saluki hounds that we saw earlier. And this, a woodblock by the Japanese artist Hiroshige, this is his interpretation of what a French woman looked like. And he's given her the facial features of the East, and he's decorated her hooped dress with fans. But what we're going to look at is the dog. Look at the dog with its brilliant red tongue and its very bright eyes. And he's full of energy and clearly good humor, despite this boy riding on his back and using his ears as handlebars. But it's been suggested that Hiroshige was perhaps trying to portray a superhound from Japanese mythology. And continuing with the theme of fidelity, this effigy of a dog from Sir Richard Pembridge's tomb, 1375, this is in Herefordshire, England, and we associate dogs with fidelity, and it's in this role that dogs appear on medieval gravestones. Sir Richard Pembridge, Knight of the Garter, was a star of innumerable battles during the 100 Years' War, and he had given very detailed instructions as to how he wanted to be buried and what was to happen. So although he was buried facing the Virgin Mary, with his head resting on a wreath of roses and a plume of feathers, He still wanted his pet dog at his side, or actually at his feet. So the beautifully carved alabaster shows accurate and very close observation. The fur is especially well done, and the dog's face shows great individuality. And notice he's wearing a dog collar, a sign of his attachment to his knight. Together with Sir Edwin Landseer, Britton Riviere was one of the foremost Victorian animal painters in Great Britain. And he was admired not only for his ability to render the physique of his subjects, as we see here in this very magnificent dog, but also to invest them with semi-human virtues, such as the heroic devotion displayed here. I think you can see. Yes. The English novelist and playwright John Galsworthy wrote of dogs, "These quiet friends carry away with them so many years of our own lives." The poignancy of this photograph touches me every time I look at it. So this is a very moving dual portrait of a Confederate soldier with his dog. And notice the dog is looking very stoical and sitting on that table with a very nice tablecloth. And it's an ambrotype, and apparently with this type of photograph, it meant that the dog and the sitter did not have to stay absolutely still for 10 or 15 minutes, which had been the case earlier. But the dog, I have to say, does look a little bit fed up. And this one, 1918, Will He Come Back? A dog waits patiently for its master to return. But up here, this is the First World War certificate of condolence that confirms that Sapper Alexander Murray of the Royal Engineers will never come back. The citation states, "He passed out of the sight of men by the path of duty and self-sacrifice, giving up their own lives that others might live in freedom." Robert Morley, the artist, was a well-known painter of animals who lived in Gloucestershire, England, and he may or may not have known Alexander Murray, but lost two of his nephews in the First World War. A piece, another painting by Sir Edwin Landseer. So Landseer's dog paintings of the 1830s are amongst his most celebrated works, and Dignity and Impudence remains the most popular of all. Here Landseer wittily contrasts the scale and character of a bloodhound called Grafton and a West Highland Terrier called Scratch. Both dogs belonged to Jacob Bell, who had commissioned the picture. The painting's composition parodies the Dutch portrait tradition, whereby the subject is framed by a window with an arm or a hand extending over the edge, just as the bloodhound's paws hang over the edge of the kennel. So Landseer draws attention to the dog's human characteristics. The soulful look and gentle dignity of the bloodhound is contrasted with the mischievous expression of the small terrier. And artists not only love to paint their own dogs, but self-portraits of themselves with their dogs. And I've chosen just one, of Frida Kahlo. And this self-portrait, Frida Kahlo surrounded herself with animals, with parrots, with monkeys, and with dogs. And given her passion for Mexico's pre-Columbian past, it's not surprising that her canine companions should be xolos, those hairless dogs, those living representations of the Aztec deity Xolotl. or that she named her first one Signor Xolotl. He figured not just in this 1945 self-portrait, where she's drawn on her own dictionary of symbols and allegories, but also in another very famous painting, The Love Embrace of the Universe, the Earth, myself, Diego, in Signor Xolotl. And while this is not a self-portrait, this Mrs. Janet Sheed Roberts, 2012, this is a portrait by John Wonnacott, an English painter, a portrait painter, and his great passion is creating a unique relationship between painting and observation, and creating the visual experience for the spectator. It's something that he'll never grow tired of, he says. And he sums it up this way: the new subject always provides some kind of stimulant that adds something new to the painting. So the full title of this painting is Mrs. Janet Sheed Roberts, aged 110, with Frenchie, aged 4. Now, while I'm impressed by the advanced age of the sitter, my eyes are drawn to Frenchie, who I think is a schnauzer, who's clearly seen something of much greater interest in the garden and has very little interest in the front of his face being depicted. And this, by special request, this is especially for Rennie. Beloved by all but the art world was the headline in a recent article I read about one of the most well-known collections of paintings, prominently featuring dogs playing poker. The iconic series by the American painter with the wonderful name of Cassius Marcellus Coleridge began with Poker Game in 1894. And frankly, I was spoilt for choice, Rennie. I mean, I could have given the whole talk on the 16 paintings. And the reason that they had been commissioned was for a cigar ad campaign. So the final painting was completed in 1910. But look at the expressions on their faces. I mean, and the cigars. Look at the Saint Bernard with the and this one. And then kind of, what's he doing? So one of the articles that I read went to great pains to describe what was happening in each game of poker, but as I don't play poker, it was hard for me to follow. But anyway, so one critic has described these dogs in this series as indelibly burned into the American collective schlock subconscious. And ever since Coolidge created the series, they've appeared in a range of films, TV shows, cartoons, songs, and artworks. Uncannily, these earnest animals often resemble people we know. And Cassius Marcellus Coleridge helped cement dogs as a viable art subject in the modern era. The American artist Jeff Koons tests the boundaries between popular and elite culture. In Puppy, he's created a work that references the 18th century European formal garden. And here we see a behemoth West Highland Terrier carpeted in bedding plants. The piece employs the most saccharine of iconology. Flowers and puppies. It's truly a monument to the sentimental. The work may be read as an allegory of contemporary culture. Dignified and stalwart as it stands guard at the Bilbao Guggenheim Museum, Puppy fills the viewer with awe and perhaps for some people, even joy. And I have to thank Alan Edelman and Juanita Perez for this. So Bad Dog is 28 feet tall and 7.5 meters high, and it's composed of 52 digitally cut fiberglass and composite materials. Inside is a bucket of yellow paint, and the mechanized sculpture periodically squirts a stream of yellow paint. So when I was doing a run-through of this for Doug so that he could time me so I wasn't going on too long, he said, "But where's the yellow paint?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. This is the image that Alan sent me." "Well, it doesn't make any sense. What do they do with the yellow paint?" So I'm assuming that when it periodically sprays the paint, shortly afterwards, some museum worker then comes out, scrubs it in time for it to be done again. And this is on view at the Orange County Museum of Art, and it's the work of a 74-year-old artist called Richard Jackson, and it's his first retrospective. But it is wonderful, isn't it? I wish I should have looked to see if I could find a photograph where there was a man standing next to it, just so that you've got an idea of the scale. But I think from the height of the building that we know how intimidating this is. It would be very interesting to see Puppy and Bad Dog together, and perhaps the dogs playing poker. Now, for those of you who walk around the Valle de Tongo, this dog sculpture is something that Doug, my husband, sees on a regular basis. As far as we know, we couldn't find a name who did the sculpture, but for me, it's very definitely a reference to the Rufino Tamayo animals that we saw earlier. And Dog Show. The Dog Show 1929. This is a wood engraving, and it shows an English dog show from almost a century ago, and it's a charming reminder of still how popular they are. For example, England's Crufts Dog Show, founded in 1891, is the largest of its kind in the world, with an average of 28,000 dogs taking part and 160,000 humans attending. In contrast, in the United States, the Westminster Kennel Club Dog Show, which was founded in 1877, only averages 2,500 entrants, but that's because the admission requirements are that much more stringent for the Westminster Kennel Club. And when I was looking at this, if you look at the gentleman here, I don't know whether you're able to see it, but he's holding a handkerchief to his nose, and one assumes that's because of the pleasant odor of all these dogs around. And it's subtitled The Ant, who is obviously this woman in her +4s, grooming her West Highland Terrier. If you haven't seen Christopher Guest's 2000 film, Best in Show, I do encourage you, because it is an absolute delight. And while one friend in England said, "Oh, dog shows are not like that," a friend in Canada who is a vet and used to breed standard poodles said, "Oh no, this was very accurate indeed." And if we're talking about dogs, there have to be some cartoons. I will read these out for you. I was spoilt for choice. In the New Yorker, this one on the left-hand side is, "Thank you for your email. I will be out for a walk for the next 20 minutes and plan on barking remotely until my return." And then the one on the right, the two dogs looking in Sofa World, is, "Ooh, I'd get up on that big fuzzy one." So I really like that one as well. And this is the photograph I showed at the beginning. This was taken by Elliot Erwitt, and it's from his book entitled Simply Dogs. He's now 95, and he's had a remarkable career spanning 70 years. And he's been quoted as saying, "I take a lot of pictures of dogs because I like dogs. They don't object to being photographed, and because they don't ask for prints." And here's Arbor. Arbor is a former shelter dog, and her paintings sell for hundreds of dollars, with all proceeds going towards helping dogs in need. Arbor's highest fetched, and no pun is intended there, $453, and most of her paintings sell on eBay. It takes her between 10 and 15 minutes to complete a piece, but she only, according to her owner, she only creates one a month. And this is Alan Weston's Jack Russell Terrier. He's an English artist known for his photorealism style of painting. And as Sir Edwin Landseer did with Dignity and Impudence, what Weston's done with this portrait of the Jack Russell is he's also parodying the Dutch portraits, because with the paws of the dog hanging over the edge of the frame. And so this seems a good spot to read from a book of poetry entitled God Got a Dog by Cynthia Rylant. God got a dog. She never meant to. She liked dogs. She'd liked them ever since she was a kid. But she didn't think she had time for a dog now. She was always working, and dogs needed so much attention. God didn't know if she could take being needed by one more thing. But she saw this dog out by the tracks, and it was hungry and cold and lonely. And God realized she'd made that dog somehow. Somehow she was responsible, though she knew logically that she had only set the world on its course. She couldn't be blamed for everything, but she saw this dog and she felt bad. So she took it on home and named it Ernie, and now God has somebody keeping her feet warm at night. And finally, a greeting card. And I think I bought 2 or 3 of these to give to friends. Dog is such a very small word for something that takes up so much room in your heart. And in the top left-hand corner, it's extraordinary how little things become immeasurable love. So thank you very much, and Tanya would like to say a few words.
Janet, that was lovely. Thank you so, so, so much. 17 years ago, we started our dream of La Buena Vibra while we were living still in Malaysia. The land was all abandoned, and through the years, we were able to transform it to what it is today. So where we stand dreaming of a possible future, we know anything is possible, even more so with your kind support and generosity. Animales con Buena Vibra is an association which purpose is to take dogs off the streets, have them sterilized, cured from parasites, and receiving professional veterinary attention before being placed in a loving home, either here or abroad. We plan to have a full-time vet and eventually offer temporary kennel care for those dogs that need to be looked after while their owners travel for whatever purpose. This will provide additional income to support all our expenses. Finally, we plan to tie in with a leading pet food company such as Hills Science Diet in order to receive additional financing, publicity, and support. So tonight, we throw the first stone in the pond to create an ever-expanding ripple. Thank you all for your kindness and for being here in our first event. And thank you again, Janet, for that lovely, lovely conference. Thank you so much to our architect, Carlos Noriega, which is sitting here, which gave me these renders of what we wish it could be, but we can dream. We already have the land. We already, it has the wall, it's all enclosed, and we're going to start constructing soon. Yeah. Thank you.